So a while ago, I bought all kinds of cheap, small form factor stuff, and today I'm going to be making a computer out of some of these ancient relics. In my previous video, I showed off this TFX 250 watt power supply from FoxConn, and that's what we're going to be using in today's build. I'm basically just going into this by building everything around the power supply. This power supply form factor is not very common, and it's mostly used in office PCs. If you ever had an Optiplex, you're probably familiar with these. The design is not anything special, but it's made by FSP, so the build quality is decent. We have active PFC, and the bulk capacitors are made by Tiapo. They're a Taiwanese company, and they're pretty much the standard for mid-range power supplies. I am once again going to be designing and 3D printing a case for this build, and this time I thought it would be a cool idea to try and design a cube case that would fit a full-height graphics card and a mini ITX motherboard. The motherboard we've got is a Gigabyte GAH110, which is a LGA 1151 socket motherboard, and it supports 6th and 7th gen Intel chips. I pulled this motherboard out of this nasty tiny computer that I got for 2,500 Ukrainian pesos, which is about 60 bucks. We're also going to be using the RAM and cooler from this tiny computer. Now, when I first got this tiny computer, it wouldn't even turn on. And when I removed the CPU cooler, I understood why. This thing was absolutely caked in years of dust. I stealthily borrowed my girlfriend's makeup brush for the cleaning process, and after getting rid of the dust, the motherboard was working just fine. My guess is that the dust was keeping the RAM from making proper contact with the RAM slot, which was stopping it from booting up properly. The RAM we have is 2 sticks of DDR4 Exceleram, and each stick is 4 gigs, and the frequency is 2400 megahertz, giving us 8 gigs in total. I wish I could put 16 gigs of RAM in here, but these 2 sticks are perfectly fine, and I don't know what else I'm going to be using them for, so I'm just going with these. This tiny PC also came with a super small low-profile cooler from ID Cooling. It's tiny, but at least it has this copper center, which should make it a little bit more efficient. Alright, now on to the exciting stuff. For the CPU, we have an i7-6700, which is a 4-core 8-thread CPU. It turbos up to 4 gigahertz, and it runs pretty cool, as it is a 65-watt TDP chip. I actually think I got a pretty good deal for this. I got it for 15 bucks, and obviously you can get a Xeon for the same price, and they will both perform exactly the same. But this way I can put i7 into the title of my listing when I go to sell this computer. And to go along with this i7-6700, we have one of the greatest graphics cards to have ever been created. Make way for the GTX 1050 Ti. The one that we've got here is the Phoenix from Asus. It has one single fan, a tiny little aluminum heatsink, no external power connector required, 4 gigs of GDDR5, Pascal architecture, perhaps one of the greatest architectures of all time. All around, just a really wonderful card. I got this thing for 45 bucks, and when it arrived, the packaging smelled like some kind of cured meats, or maybe a pickled vegetable. I did not do a taste test to see if it was infused with any kind of flavor, but maybe it was, and hopefully that will make our computer delicious. For the storage, we have a 240 gig SATA SSD from Kingston, which I got for 10 bucks. Pretty much enough for Windows and a handful of older games. The motherboard also has an M.2 slot, which is pretty cool since you can get a NVMe or M.2 SSD for a nice little upgrade. Okay, now time for the case. Like I said, I am going to be designing a little cube case, and there were a few things I wanted to accomplish with this case. First off, I of course wanted to use this TFX power supply in a way that would still keep this build fairly compact. Secondly, I wanted to do a build where the whole case is assembled from panels that I will print lying face flat on the print bed. I've realized building 3D printed cases this way is pretty much the best way to ensure that the pieces are as robust as possible. For the third point, I wanted to make sure all the pieces would fit on the print bed of my Anycubic i3 Mega S, which has a print bed that allows for 220 by 220 by 210 millimeter prints. And this is pretty much why I decided to go with this cube design, just because it fits well on my printer. And finally, and I think most importantly, is I don't want this case to use a riser. This is one of the things that I don't like when it comes to SFF cases. It feels like all the popular designs are made with risers in mind, which just makes these builds that much more expensive. But with this case, I feel like you can really save some money with the rest of your build, and you can actually have a nice, cheap, compact PC. First of all, these TFX power supplies are way cheaper than the more popular Flex power supplies that everyone uses for SFF builds. And of course, with this particular case, you can have a regular full-height graphics card without needing a riser. Also, you have quite a lot of room for storage, so if you have a bunch of 2.5-inch drives, you can fit them in here pretty easily. I'd say the only thing here that is expensive is the mini ITX motherboard. There's just no getting around that. While everything else is pretty much the same cost as a regular PC. One thing I wish I had done different is I should have opened up the power supply and I should have flipped the cooler around just so that it would be blowing cool air onto the CPU, which would have definitely helped keep this thing cool. This CPU doesn't get very hot, but the cooler is very small, so I think the extra cold air would have helped. Although I was able to hot glue this little 80mm fan in there, which does help bring down the temperatures. Alright, let's get into some games. I don't really even know why I'm testing this first one because any potato can run this, but as you can see, GTA 5 does indeed work. Before I turned on VSync, I actually was getting almost 200 FPS. Wow, what a supercomputer. Looking back on these tests, I actually wish I had tried out some emulators, because I think this setup would actually be great for emulation. I think you could actually get away with some PS3 and some Switch games on here, as long as they're not too intensive. Oh well, I guess that's something I'll have to test out with some future builds. I will say that Wii, GameCube, and PS2 and PSP will absolutely work flawlessly on here. Next game we've got is Fallout 4. Last time I tested this game, it was a really horrible slideshow, but here we're in a pretty intensive part of the game. Medium settings, 1080p resolution, and we are at 75 FPS, which is my monitor's refresh rate. Without VSync, you'd have slightly more FPS, but with a lot of screen tearing. It's a pretty great experience, and I think a game like this is pretty much where this setup really shines. Next up is Witcher 3, 1080p, medium settings, and on average we're staying above 40 FPS here. With low settings you can get to around 50 or 60. The frame time graph looks a little weird because I have VSync on, but the performance feels nice and smooth. Like always, I am using the old version of Witcher 3. With the next gen update, you'll definitely have worse performance. But I'd say that with this hardware, I would stick to the old release of the game. And the final game we've got is, of course, one of my favorite games, Elden Ring. 720p, medium settings. Basically with this graphics card, you can choose between 720p medium settings or 1080p low settings and have very similar performance. So I just went with 720p. The official recommended system for this game wants you to have 12 gigs of RAM, and this computer only has 8. But I'd say the game is still very playable even with 8. It's not the same as games like Stalker 2 or Last of Us, where the game just wouldn't launch for me with 16 gigs of RAM. Here the game runs just fine even though the RAM is maxed out, and I'm not really seeing any lag or stutter like you would expect with a RAM bottleneck. I first played through this whole game with a much worse setup than this, so I'll say that this kind of performance is actually very acceptable, at least for me. And I would definitely play through the game like this, even if the system doesn't meet the official requirements. That's all the games for today. I'm very happy with how the build turned out. I think this is a very cool concept for a case. It's pretty compact, about 7 liters, doesn't use any fancy small form factor graphics card or flex power supply or riser cable. The only thing here that you're paying a premium for is the mini ITX motherboard. And you could probably modify this build to work with a micro ATX motherboard, but sadly my 3D printer wouldn't have the bed space to print all those panels out in one go. So that's why I went with the mini ITX. I also really want to try this case out with a full-sized ATX power supply, which I think would work very well here. That will definitely be a future build I'm going to be looking into. But for now, that's going to be it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.